Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. It's a wonderful time of year, and it's always a good time for the river. And I've been involved in looking into the river for a long time. I was with the Daily News for a while. I've written several books about it. One is Merrimack, the Resilient River. One is Reclaiming the Merrimack. And one, this sounds vainglorious, but so be it. This is Boston's Fading Ink. And this was about my career in journalism, but a couple interesting people are on the cover. And one of them is my old friend Bud Collins. You might remember him. He's up here. We were both much younger then, but I knew him a long time when I was a tennis writer, and he's on the book also. George Mitchell is there, and Audrey Hepburn. I could go into that, but look into the book. Well, thank you very much again for coming. And the Merrimack River, as you can see here, is 117 miles long. One of the reasons we're here is so we can learn more about it, so we can do more to preserve it, and so we can appreciate it more. And I was surprised when I started working on this. It wasn't a great support group, but through the Riverfront Commission, through a lot of different things, people like you, there's more support for it. This is the opening. It's been around for a long time, and the colonists used it. But one challenge, even today, is that this is a very dangerous opening, dangerous aperture. The sandbars are significant. In fact, sad to say, we had a drowning not long ago. And so we always have to be careful. If you're swimming, if there are newcomers in town, you cannot go swimming in the Merrimack River out near the breakwater. You cannot do it. We've lost a lot of people over the years. Here is a graphic of how the river looks. It starts in New Hampshire, and it comes all the way down through Manchester, Nashua, and of course to our area. And because in the era of hydropower, it was a great force for mills and creating the New England economy. And many people worked in the mills, and also many immigrants came to this part of the world to work in the mills. The Franco-Americans of Maine came here. I only say that because I wrote a couple books about that, because we lived in Biddeford, Maine, and near Lewiston. So many people did come down and enjoy the opportunity to work for cash wages. Here is a wonderful photo of Newburyport back in the day, and it's by Richard Burke Jones. He was the city clerk, and when I knew him as a city clerk because I covered the city council and whatever, and when I learned how adept he was in art, I was just amazed. As you can see, his artwork is tremendous. And the other thing that amazes me is look how large these vessels were, and they're larger than some of the buildings. They were close to 300 feet long. They carried 100 crew and staff. If they were going distances, they carried animals, they carried trees. These were enormous vessels, and even by today's standards, I'm awed by it. Here is a vessel, the Symington, which was launched in about 1893 and was one of the last tall ships to be built in Newburyport. Ships had gotten heavy and they couldn't get through the shallow Newburyport harbor, as we just said, when they were filled with cargo. But I love this photo. You can see on the left is being built, and of course in the foreground, when it was being launched, the ladies got dressed up, and to the right, there's people came down on horseback. And again, these were enormous vessels, and it was a big day indeed when one of them was launched. The whole hydropower piece starts near Lowell. Of course, it starts in New Hampshire, but this is a picture of the way it looked 2 centuries ago. And the Merrimack was the site of some of the greatest, largest textile production in the world. When I mentioned Henry David Thoreau, he was concerned way back when that too many mills and mechanization was going to ruin the purity of the woods and the streams, and also perhaps the society. But the Spigot River, as you can see in Lawrence, had enormous mills and brought many immigrants to the Merrimack Valley in the late 19th century. And this is an example of it. The mills were dirty, the rivers were very dirty, but that's how the Industrial Revolution started. Here is a clock in Lawrence, and was one of the largest in the world a century ago. A large community clocks let workers know what time it was and when their shift started. So it had many, different reasons for it. But I think we've all been, along the highway up near 495, and some of the mills are still there. And I've walked through them. They're so enormous that even, as I say, in the modern era, it's incredible. They were so big. Manchester, New Hampshire had enormous complexes, and here was the Great Flood of 1936. And for a time, it ruined the operations of the Ameskeag Manufacturing Company. And look at the power of the water at that time. Sometimes in summer, the river is quite docile, but other times, as you can see here, it was a tremendous calamity for that community. This is close to us. There's the sandbar that you can see there. And, as I say, in the modern era, many boaters today have to know where the sandbar is and have to be aware of it. Also, what the tide is. Some people not from the area are not aware. At low tide, it's a dangerous place. At high tide, you do a little better. The Coast Guard vessels are a familiar sight on the Merrimack, and Newburyport is the birthplace of the Coast Guard. That is why some of the large clipper ships back in the day were taken over by the U.S. Navy and then made kind of into a Coast Guard. But today it is the birthplace of the Coast Guard, and you've probably seen the vessels along here. And again, the Coast Guard is so valuable. I mean, they just had a major rescue recently, and they're a good group of people. Here is the Merrimack, and it is a fine place to keep a boat. Here are several vessels in Amesbury, and you can see that, a good part of the area is still wooded. There's still much recreational area. There's somewhat of a controversy about swimming, and in my view, if you're north of Manchester, it's good, and maybe even north of Lowell, but south of that, I think, is challenging, although it looks very clean. Haverhill has made a major comeback in recent years, and new buildings have risen on the Merrimack, and they have numerous parks there, and it's nationally known as a community that's taken advantage of the river to rebuild its downtown. The National Park Service in Lowell runs vessels in the summer. I've taken this trip if you're ever interested. Their moderators are very knowledgeable. So you learn a lot in a short period of time, and you get a wonderful boat ride. So, if you have relatives coming and you don't know what to do, you might think of taking that trip. Here's the start of the Merrimack River in Franklin, New Hampshire. I took some of these photos, and actually I was awed to be there, to think that I was at the start of the river, and this is where it started, and of course it's so very different. The Nashua River and the Merrimack merge in Nashua, New Hampshire, and here is the site where they actually come together. UMass Lowell has, of course, been a major force in this area in recent decades, and here the river wanders through the Lowell campus. And fishermen try their luck at Riverside Park in Lowell. Again, I don't know whether they should be eating the fish, but catching them remains a popular avocation. And here, some of the dams have been engineered, dammed, and rerouted. Major changes started 2 centuries ago in the early 1820s, and here's some of the original buildings from that era. And here's the falls in Manchester, New Hampshire. We talked a little about hydropower, and it's the reason that city prospered in the 19th and 20th centuries. Here's Manchester again. Here's, if you know your local politics, at State Rep Jim Kelcourse, he's a state rep at the time, he's in the lead craft. And he's about as large a guy as you can get into a kayak. I don't know if there's a kayak stuffing event anywhere, but Jim would be part of that opportunity. And here's about 6 years ago, a group of people who love the Merrimack went all the way down the river. Here's a wonderful shot, and close to a dozen paddled the entire 117 miles. They, did stop at night and camp on the beach or on the campus if they went by one, but they did the whole trip. And here's one of our wonderful shots, Newburyport Harbor. In the summer, there's about 1,500 boats on the entire, going up to about Haverhill. And here you can see some of them. And, it's a beautiful day. And in recent decades, I think vessels have gotten larger. And some of them, as you can see, if you walk past there, some of them are very large vessels by international travelers or Newburyport's gotten on the map, go to Newport, go to Boston, go to Newburyport, go to Bar Harbor, that type of thing. And here is a scenic spot where the Merrimack River comes by, the Amesbury-Merrimack line, and this is, you can see again that there's still a lot of greenery and naturalness to the river. Fishing, of course, decades ago was a major enterprise. Now there are only a few vessels out there. And it's so difficult, as you know, to get in, to get out, to get the market. And, but if you stand down there occasionally, as I do, and talk to the few fishermen left, they're still at it. They do catch fish and they get them to market. But here's some detritus in the right corner that, they brought up, they found, they dragged it, and then of course they'll have that taken away to a disposal area. More politicians, but this was such a wonderful shot, I couldn't overlook it because both have been very helpful with the river, and you kind of have to be on the river to know the river, as these people have. That's State Senator, she's a higher office, I think she's state auditor now, and Jim Kelcourse, Diana DeZaglio, but both have been great backers of the river, and I love this just because it shows enthusiasm and energy, and they're real supporters. This is one of my favorite characters in life. Ellen Swallow Richards, she's not too well known, but many years ago, decades ago, she helped improve the drinking water after typhoid had broken out in Lawrence. And if you think of a person who could save a large city from typhoid, I mean, that's an incredible thing, and she did. In medical journals, she is well known. To me, she should be honored in a higher way, and that's why I always like to mention her. She was the first woman graduate of MIT and just was a major force in helping the river. Here's Senator Ed Muskie. We probably all remember him. This was from his early days in Washington, and he helped sponsor the Clean Water Act in 1972. And it's curious, and I looked over the documents, how much opposition there was to the Clean Water Act. I mean, sure, it costs money and whatever, but every state has water, but so many conservative blocks were just tried to put a roadblock for clean water. And now we realize how important it is. It's helped us, it's helped every state. But he was very courageous and very effective in the Clean Water Act. Here's another picture, and I mention that because my wife Vicki and I knew the Muskies because we lived in Waterville, Maine, and Maine for quite a while. He was a nice guy, a little abrupt, and you had to ask the right question. I mean, for a reporter. But what a force he was, and he has a loud shadow on the river here. Again, he put in many tenacious hours doing this. His wife, Jane, is to his right shoulder there, and so she came to the hearings, and he was a major force. Senator George Mitchell of Maine was effective in calling for low-interest loans to pay for sewage treatment plants. And I think we all know that sewage treatment plants are so important, but they weren't back in the 70s or 80s. And he was one of the ones who had to fight very hard for it. And his amendments in 87 to the Clean Water Act of 72 are still operational, and he has been very valuable. Of course, you know, I think he was very valuable too, because back in the day, I always try to get a personal anecdote in. Our daughter was a page for him in Washington one fall. So it's very exciting to drive to Washington to meet Senator Mitchell, to hear him talk about his feelings about the river, and to see him welcome, you know, these 17-year-old kids who are trying to learn more about government. And so he's certainly a hero in our family. Senator Paul Tsongas, who many of us remember, of course, was also a great champion of the river. He was from the Lowell area and, you know, was soft-spoken but very valuable, very funny, and was a great advocate of the river. Here's one of my favorite photos. You know, it's a little poignant because he was taken so early, but isn't this a wonderful family? And here's a wonderful memorial adjacent to the Merrimack River, and he died at 56 some years ago. Here's the Whittier Bridge, which we've probably all crossed. It was a large project, $292 million, and enables natives and tourists alike to traverse the Merrimack. Here is, you know, before and after. Not exactly, but it certainly shows what did happen, and it shows that to the left, a very dirty river. And I use that because when you say, oh, the rivers were dirty, oh, the rivers are polluted, it doesn't quite do justice to it if you've seen some of these photos. That and then those houses there, I mean, that is a dirty and dangerous river. So, you know, when people in the day complained about, you know, spending too much money, you know, this is what people, regular people, lived with, and they had to be very careful of, and the number of diseases we've talked about in those days was quite high. Here is another uncomfortable photo, but, you know, it does show, this is relatively recently in the last decade. We still have work to do. There are folks who go down the river and clean things like this out of there. There's a lot of people working on the river, but people like us have to remember that we have to give our vocal support, you know, anytime we hear there's an effort to clean the river. Here's a pretty spot. I think we've all walked down here. And Newburyport has improved its sewage treatment plant quite a bit in recent years, but it still has pipes dumping dirty rainwater into the river. So the rainwater is kind of one of the next hurdles for clean water, because it's these systems that have been here for decades do pick it up. The water's dirty, and communities have to think about making a greater effort to keep the rainwater out of, make sure that the dirty rainwater doesn't go into the river during big storms. And here again is the Merrimack River. It's a beautiful asset. This is in the Haverhill-Amesbury area. And you can see how much building has gone on in this area in past decades. And the river is under duress for that. And again, we have to work to keep it clean. This bridge is very famous. This is a beautiful shot, and this is sunset right in our area. I mentioned Senator DiZoglio when she was a senator. She was very helpful in the river, as I said. Now, you probably didn't expect to see Richard Nixon's smiling face at the end of cocktail hour. But here he is. Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and Ed Muskie. And Nixon is part of it, and we don't have to go into the baggage, but it was during his administration, 1972, that clean water was passed, and certainly since everything happened, his team has taken a lot of credit for it. I don't think he personally worked very hard for it, but I'm not taking any credit away. The bill of 1972 passed, and here were some, great figures passed here. Well, there's two great figures there anyway. You make the choice. And this is just another woman who I wanted to highlight. Annie Brown was a bird lover from Stoneham. She donated about $25,000 way back when, a century ago, to the Audubon Society. And she was an early person. I was going to say early bird, and I just should have stayed away from that. But she was an early enlightened person who gave a lot of money and started the the preservation of Plum Island. So if you go out to the refuge, when you turn right and keep going, this is one of the key people ever for this island. And again, she's not very well known, and I think she should be. She helped save Plum Island. I love this photo. It's from about 1890, and people were picnicking, and even back then you can see how desirable a spot in Plum Island was and how much people enjoyed going there. And so even many, many years ago, it was a major force in this community. The good old days of Plum Island, well, the area, it's called the center now, it's not there anymore, but again, it was a great gathering spot, as you can see, and people used to take the bus down and go there. In fact, my doubles partner in town is a guy named Dick Canepa, and he taught at Pentucket for many years. And he said the kids would hitchhike down and they'd swim and they'd go to the pavilion and they'd just have a great time. And so that may have been in the 30s. This is a little earlier than that, but these are the good old days, and it was fun. So this is the end of Sandy Beach on Plum Island, and you've got to arrive early. I used to take the kids down there, and there's a very small parking lot when you get to the end. But it's a wonderful spot. And again, much of the island has been preserved. It's like it used to be, and it's just a wonderful thing. Here is the other end of Plum Island, Reservoir Terraces to the left. You can see that a lot of the island has been left without build-up. Of course, on the right side of this, there are many, many buildings, but there's a lot of good things left to be said. So I want to thank you for listening. I thank you for your interest in Plum Island. We always have to, do what we can do for Plum Island, for the river, and thank you very much, James, for having me. If there are any questions, yeah.
I grew up on Plum Island Point. We could tell which, the cannery there, we could tell which dye they were using by the color of the water. You also had a picture of maybe 30, an aerial view of Plum Island. I tell everybody that used to be a radar station. You have pictures of the radar station.
Oh, really?
When you showed an aerial view of Plum Island, and nobody knows it was, I talk about the used to hang around there. You actually have pictures of the radar station.
Yeah.
Doc, you mentioned the origin of the river in Franklin, New Hampshire. Is its origin fed by springs and streams from the White Mountains, or?
I don't think the orange was from Franklin, New Hampshire, but yeah, the beginning of it is from the streams of New Hampshire. We used to go to North Conway a lot, and many streams come down and they begin in Franklin, but yes, you're right, there are many tributaries. Well, I want to thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and keep the river rolling.